They're recording now. Thank you that we are through that part. And so I'll share my screen and we'll get started. And so the OMA, as I said, is in 5 tasks. Let me close that one out and pull this one up. So here's what it looks like. Organizational management analysis, and it gives you, what all your student learning objectives here. And these come from, now I'm going to talk about North Carolina. I know some of you South Carolina, but it's the same in South Carolina. And so when I reference these things, it's all the same. And so here are your student learning objectives. And so here is your overview of each of the tasks. Task 1 examines the school in its context, both internally and externally. Organizational structures, management routines, and operations. And so we'll talk about what that is, what those things are. Instructional capacity building, that is your PLP. It's basically a copy and paste from the PLP where you did a professional learning plan for your school that was academically based. That's what this is. And so when our students, our regular add-ons, they simply do a copy and paste of their tasks 1 through 3 of their professional learning plan, which we call the APTEL for them. It's the same thing. It's pretty much just a copy and paste. And then we go about building the schedule in task 3. Now you can either build a entire master schedule for your school, or you can just modify the existing one where you focus on, we need to fix this part. Now, I'm not saying that you have to do that in your school or that you even have to present it to, but a lot of times folks present these to their administration, and sometimes these are incorporated in. But that is not a part. You just got to develop it. We're interested in the process. How do you go about building a master schedule? I mean, I know that somewhere in your schools, whether the principal admitted it or not, there's a gridded off whiteboard and there's stickies that go in the little blocks. The question is whose names go on the stickies and why? That's what master scheduling is about. And I'll go ahead and say this now. If you as the leader are not in charge of master scheduling, then you're not the leader. The person that makes the master schedule runs the school. And then 4, you'll reflect on the competencies that you didn't reflect on in the APSEL. So just like when Stacy turned hers in this morning, she reflected on 12 competencies. The other 9 you reflect on that you didn't reflect on in the APSEL, you do in the OMA, because there's 21 competencies. So let's look specifically at our task and prompts. All right, so analysis of school context. And so I have a really wonderful example that is really short. It's only about 60 pages. Mary Wilson. And you talk about where your school is located, what the context is, information about the school and community. Then you talk about the school itself. Now you say, well, Dale, where am I going to find this information on my school and community? In your advanced ed or SACS document, the first chapter talks about your school and community. That's where you get it. Whatever your accreditation system is, that's where you will find the demographic information, the external context for your school. Average population, average income, average education, the history of the school, the history of the community. That's what we're interested in. That puts your school in context external. After you get that, then you start putting your school in context internal. What grades do you serve? How many kids do you have? Your attendance, your discipline, most importantly, your test scores. Everything that's on your state report card, teacher quality, all of those things. That's what we want to see in that task 1. Now, To conclude task 1, we want you to find out, not from your bookkeeper, but from your principal, how much input the school improvement team has in your local development of your local budget. Your local school budget has your local accounts. If you're a high school, you have 2. If you're elementary or middle, you have 1. Sometimes middles have 2. You have local accounts, but you have federal funds, state funds, and then local county funds. And you have all of those different funds that build your local school schedule. And so what we're trying to determine is how much input the school improvement team has in building that local schedule, that local school budget. So this is where I'm going to pause for a second and stop for just a minute and ask a question this morning. Why is it important for the school improvement team to have input in the local school budget?
Stakeholders say and where funds go.
Yeah.
That's when exactly. That school improvement team has that different stakeholders. That Mary's exactly right. It has community members. If it's a high school, it might even have a student, as parents, as teachers. All these different stakeholders have a say. Overarching also is that school improvement plan is designed to improve the school. And so it speaks to your academics. And so here is a presentation that I do when I work with school districts on building master schedules that serve them. And I'm going to share, this is also under today's materials, the blinking blackboard, but this is the notion. Now let me go to share. Now I'll go to that. If I can't go between them. The path to school improvement, the continuous improvement model that we use in school has to look like this. It's a triangle. And one of the cornerstones is the school budget. The other is the master schedule. They have to support the school improvement plan. What good is it to identify through your school improvement plan the needs of your school if you don't put your money behind it? What good is it to identify the academic needs in your school if you don't design your master schedule that way to support that school improvement plan? So the notion here is that if you don't have any input from your school improvement plan people, which is your school improvement team that develop that plan, if they're not a part of that budgeting process, how do you assure then that your school budget supports the school improvement plan? You have no way to know. One of the things that I see when I go in and I work with these districts, this was, by the way, this was for Thomasville City Schools. I was supposed to be doing this very series of 6 workshops with Cherokee County this fall, but we got canceled due to COVID. I think we might can do something this spring, but the notion here is you must be very intentional. We talked about that a number of times yesterday in leadership. You must be intentional. You can't just assume that everybody is working in concert. Too many times when I go in districts, I'll look at their school improvement plans. First thing I ask for, that's public information. We'll talk about that in another section this morning. Your school budget and your school improvement plan, by the way, is public information. When principals say, well, we don't give that out. Yes, you do. The law says you will. And so that's 115C288C. Says that you will put that out. And that when I look at that school improvement plan, and then I look at their budget, and I look at their master schedule, they disconnect. The school improvement plan says we need to work on reading. Then I look at their master schedule. There's nothing in there that puts an emphasis on reading. And they're spending their money on skits and science. And then we wonder why there's a disconnect. And so things you need when you're putting together, and this goes right back to task 1, things that you will need when you start the master scheduling process. And that's one of the things that we ask you to do in the OMA is not look at the master schedule itself, but look at the process that developed. You know, the worst mistake that you can make in schools is develop a master schedule and half the faculty's mad. And then you start trying to change it. And then the other half's mad and everybody's mad at you. If you've got a bad master schedule, that means you need to look at the process that developed that schedule. That's the notion. Where did you fall apart? So the things, you know, you didn't understand that triangle. You didn't understand how you must link all three of those together, and that the budget and the master schedule have to support the initiatives from the school improvement plan. So the things that you'll need to build a master schedule, you'll need your report card, because that tells all of it has your attendance, it has your discipline, teacher quality, it has your test scores, has all those things. You'll need EVOS. Now, some of you in South Carolina don't do EVOS, but you do a value added. That's about whether individual teachers are getting growth with their students. You'll need your school improvement plan. You'll need your previous master schedule. You'll need your duty roster. What is a duty roster? A duty roster is what people do during the day. Bus duty, car rider duty, lunch duty, hall duty, all of those duties that you have during the day. You need those things. You need your supervision schedule. That's of your after school activities, football, athletics, all the things that you have to supervise after school. You'll need your teacher working condition survey. In South Carolina, that's your COGNIA or advanced ed survey. You'll need that. And you'll need your latest accreditation report to get, again, that's where you get your external context. Those are the things you need that you'll need to do task one, but that's what you need in real life when you do your master schedule. So when we look at the scheduling process, not the schedule, it goes in this, the rationale for building a master schedule goes in this order, always. As kids would say, don't get it twisted. It goes this way. Now, you can't just have the same 5 and just have a different order. It always has to go this way. Federal laws come first. That's your federal program. That would be EC 504, second language, Title I, gifted, and CTE for high schools. Those programs have to be scheduled first because they are the most restrictive in terms of how you use those federal dollars. You don't misspend those federal dollars but once, and you get to be the former principal at that school. My story on that one is Mary, again, I'll use Mary as the example this morning. So when I passed Jones Sausage Road on 40, how long did it take me? 27 minutes. So when I passed Jones Sausage Road on 40, heading to the beach, heading to Wilmington, about halfway between Jones Sausage Road and Wilmington, I come to Highway 42 in Newton Grove, and you get off and you head across the state of North Carolina toward Thompson. Now, to say that it's rural would be an understatement. Your GPS just spins. It can't even, it's not even been mapped out. It's so rural. And so I was going to supervise an intern at a little school out in the middle of, near Chincopen. And they were working on the road. I was on a dirt road and they were working on the road. And I had to go up a man's driveway through his carport out the backside to get to the school. That's how, my point is you can't find, I was hunting it and couldn't find it. So what is the probability that when I got there, they were having a Title I audit just by chance? So what had happened was I waited an hour, saw the principal, and I went back 2 weeks later, rode through that man's carport again to meet the new principal. Because the principal that was there the first time retired shortly after I left, because the Title I audit that was happening, there were, the third grade there, they had 3 teachers. One of them was a Title I teacher. They were not a Title I school. They had a Title I program. What's the difference? Why does it matter? If you have more than 70% or 75% of kids on free and reduced lunch, you're Title I school. And all the teachers and federal funds that come can be used for every kid in the school. But if you only have 50% of your kids on free lunch, you have a Title I program. That means that the dollars and the teachers can only work with Title I kids. That's federal law. So the teachers in third grade had whined and complained. Teacher input, number 5, he moved it up to number 1 in front of federal programs, and he distributed the load to make their loads easy. And so as soon as he did that, the Title I teacher called the Title I office and said, I've got 15 kids in my class that aren't Title I kids. And, you know, ex post facto, you know, PDQ pretty damn quick. But the auditors got there and found out, sure enough, they were spending federal money on students who were not eligible for that money. And you don't do that but once. And so I had to go back 2 weeks later and meet the new principal. So the notion here is on your scheduling rationale, it has to go this way. Federal dollars are the most restrictive and they are the most prescriptive as well. They tell you exactly what you can do with them. And if you do anything other than that with them, they even pay teacher salaries. If you do anything other than that, if you assign a federal teacher to teach, you know, a non-federal program or non-federal kids, that won't go with. And so back to our scheduling rationale, it has to go in this order every time. It has to be your federal laws. And so you've got to schedule them. You've got to schedule, that's got to be the heart of your schedule. And then you have to factor in your state laws. And that speaks to how many days you meet and how many hours per day and planning periods and duty-free time and class sizes. Class sizes is a big, because every month, the SAR is either filed or pulled electronically every month from your master schedule that's in Power School. That school activity report says how many kids are in each class. And you better believe if there's an audit done, if you say you've got 27 kids in that class, there better be just 27 kids in that class. You better not have 35 and have 8 of them on somebody else's roll. It better be what you say it is. That's so your state laws come next. And then your local Board of Education policies about like how many minutes of reading we're going to teach a week, how many on math, all of that, what our bell schedule is going to be, and all those things, those local board policies come next. And then best practices and basically your performance data comes next. Which teachers get best results with which kids and which should be teaching which courses. I inherited as a high school principal, I inherited a European AP teacher who had never had a kid pass the exam. He was O forever. None. You can't do that. And then finally, teacher input comes last. That is your master scheduling rationale. So you've got to have all this information so that you can put that together. And so here are your federal programs, as I told you. Here's the things that the state will mandate that you have to follow. Here's the local things that the local Board of Education will mandate. Here's your performance data, and then your teacher input. And basically what we want from them is student information about who ought to be together and who ought not be together. And so this is a primer for how we go about doing that. This is task 3. We put together our information from task 1 along with our academic information from task 2, that initiative that we're going to do, professional development. That's basically stands in for our school improvement plan. And this is task 3 on how we go about scheduling a school. I'm going to pause and catch my breath. I'm only 5 minutes behind, which is good for me. And all of those things are represented in this OMA, if you want to go in and look at it, you can see all the different, I used the South Carolina one. The North Carolina ones are easier. I use that as an example because I get so many people who say, well, I don't know how to do this in South Carolina. Well, right here it is. North Carolina have a pretty easy one. All the things that are in here, advanced ed report, all this stuff is here. And then this is your PLP, is task 2 is your PLP. That takes the place of your school improvement plan. And then when you get to 3, you build your, that's the end of that one. Let me see. Here's task 3, analysis of current scheduling procedures and all those other things, schedule strengths and weaknesses, alignment, all of those things. And then here's the new improved schedule that she proposed, that Mary proposed. And then you write your competencies. So that's how the OMA is. You can read the prompts and tasks. They're pretty simple. You've got a really easy guide to go by there. Now, people say, boy, that's a lot of information. It is a lot of information. There is no doubt on that. It is a lot of information that goes in that. That's why I said this one's only 60 pages. Some of them are over 100. But it's the notion of how do I go about running the day-to-day operations of my school. And I must be intentional. I can't just go eeny, meeny, miny, mo when I'm putting those yellow stickies with teachers' names on them in that grid. There's got to be a reason, a rationale for everything that I do. And that master schedule again, that master schedule has to, along with the budget, support those initiatives. Because again, what do they do at Jones Sausage? They make sausage. We teach kids. That school improvement plan is about the academic heart of your school. That's the notion here. Questions that you have, comments, thoughts on the OMA. Do you understand what you're trying to do and why you're doing it? So my question to you is, what goes on at your school? Is it the right thing? From what you just heard and saw, is your school doing the right thing?
Dr. Lamb, I have a question in the chat because I have no voice.
Uh-oh. Let me go to the chat, see if I can get it. Okay, let me answer Elizabeth's question. So using a Title I reading teacher as a sub or having them push into a classroom for extras. Now, if your school has a plan that allows for that, for either of those, then it's okay. Generally, in a Title I school, you can do that. If the whole school is Title I, yeah, you can do that. Now, if you have a Title I program, you would have to have that written into the plan where the local is picking up part of the pay of that teacher. I have seen that.
Can you say that again, Dr. Lamb, where the what is picking up part of the pay of that teacher?
All right. If you're a Title I school, that means that everybody in your school shares a Title I. This is perfectly legal. Now, if you have a Title I program, where they're only supposed to support and serve Title I kids, then you would have to write a waiver in your plan or get a plan. And usually what happens there is part of the salary of that person is picked up by the local. Now, if you just on your own did this and they were being paid by federal funds and you were pushing them into regular classrooms for support or having them sub, no, that's illegal. That's misspending federal funds. And as soon as the feds find out, it will not go well for you. But you can write a waiver or you can write a contract where maybe you're paying 75-25. The Fed.
Thank you.
Now you can't just do it on your own. No. You cannot just decide on your own. And so let me get to Ann's question now. The value added report having an AP teacher. What about when we talked about not the candidates? So thank you. All right, so value added. The value added report showed that, and that the value added in that case was the AP exam. And so those report tells you who's getting results with what kids. Now, I didn't say he couldn't get some results with some kids. He just couldn't teach AP kids. You know, there was someplace else in the organization. He didn't want to. A lot of this is about want to. He wanted to have the easy kids. In case he was late getting in, the football coach, you know, they wouldn't tear the building down. The AP kids wouldn't. He wanted them. Well, I want my hair to grow back. Can't get what you want. I think that's, you know, I think that's a Jagger Richards song. You can't always get what you want. And so now that didn't mean he couldn't teach other courses in the freshman. You know, he was pretty good with freshman history. You know, those kids got along with him, and he did a pretty good job with them. He just couldn't teach AP kids. He wasn't smart enough. Just that simple. I mean, he was you know, anybody go to Marshall? I think he came from West Virginia. He was one that, you know, those, you know, there's a great migration, or was back in the 80s and 90s, from West Virginia to North Carolina. And he was one of those. I think he'd gone to Ferrum and then maybe to Marshall. And, you know, not very, had no preparation. Nothing in his background said that he could teach an AP course. No training, no nothing. That didn't mean he couldn't teach, but he couldn't teach them. And so that's the notion of value added is you know, who can work with the kids that you've got? Who is the best fit for the, you know, the low, the medium, the high kids? And so, and you're talking about schools large enough. Well, if you've got people that can't teach any kids, that was what I was talking about earlier this semester. You got to get rid of them. If you don't have anything they can teach, then you need to give them the opportunity to be successful somewhere else. But you've got to grow the ones you've got. And if you can't grow the ones you've got to get some new ones. And so I worked with him for a semester myself, along with the team, and worked with him, and he didn't have the capacity. You know, sometimes, folks, you just got to be this high to ride this ride. And if you're not, we have to get somebody else. Kids deserve that. We don't run school for folks to have jobs. We teach kids. If you can't teach kids, we'll try to grow your capacity. If we can't grow your capacity, we'll try you somewhere else. And if you aren't any good there, then we'll help you with another career. That's the way it has to be. We can't keep people that can't get results, that don't work or that aren't working out just because, you know, they might can win a football game every now and then. Yeah, I want to, you know, when you're a high school principal, you want to win some games, but there's plenty of high school coaches out there. As I, you know, the one I replaced him with did a great job. He won a lot more games. And so what is our justification for hiring first-year teachers? I don't know that I understand that, but you know, I don't mind beginning teachers. I like beginning teachers. We can induct them into the culture that it's about teaching and learning. I like that. You know, I don't have to retrain them. You know, I'm sure somewhere in your EDCI coursework, you had a review of Lewin's change model, that you have to unfreeze, move, and then refreeze. That sounds pretty simple, but that unfreezing, that breaking the old habits, can't teach an old dog new tricks. Insert metaphor here. It applies. I'd rather have somebody that I can start with fresh. That maybe if they can find the building in sober and clean clothes, I'm good. We're ready to go. Give me that. I can train one. We'll work. I don't expect to just to hire them and send them to the room and give them a hearty handshake and a pat on the back and say, go to it. You expect with young people, but the good thing is you get to train them the way you want to. And so that's the notion here is we got to plug people in again, back to the Collins, get them in the right seat. That's exactly what we're talking about. Every history teacher can't teach the same kids. Every third grade teacher doesn't get the same results. But if they can't get any results, we're going to work with them to try to get them better. But if they can't get any results, then we got to go. We have got to go. Have we seen the value added model? Have we seen the value added where the algorithm that is EVOS? Have I shown you that? So that's where we go. I thought I had it in this morning. So let's look at our chat, and then we're going to look at that. Hired teachers turning out to be radically different from the person we interviewed. That's always a danger. Hired a brand new teacher, and she's the past veteran teacher in many ways. Yeah, that happens. And had one that was teaching from a script and don't have a script. Yeah, so that's always the trick when you're interviewing teachers is especially beginners, trying to project whether they can teach or not. That becomes, that's that notion of who do you hire and why? Are they coachable? Can you get what you need out of? Were they reading from a script? So what I did with the AP teacher, I replaced her with a second semester beginner. For her first semester, I watched her teach. We worked with her, and she was really good. She was coachable. Coachability. How do you determine that in the interviewing session? They're inquisitive. They don't have all the answers, but they want to know. You can tell they have a burning desire to be successful. So I hired this young lady. Her credentials were impeccable. She's the only beginner I ever hired who was good from day one. She came in, and her name was Stephanie Showen. Stephanie had a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from, let's see, which one's the really elite school? Was it Boston College is the really, so her undergraduate was from NYU and her master's from Boston College. She came in and she was great. And after one semester, I moved her to AP, and she said to me, but it's not my turn. I just, I'm new. It's not about turn. It's about talent. Sometimes you get these young people, but she was coachable. And Mary's going to talk to us now about, a lot of times it's scenarios and teaching lessons during the interviewing process. Mary just chimed in about what you do to try to determine who's coachable and who has the ability to learn. Mary, talk to us about that.
When I was department chair before I started the master's program at Gardner-Webb, all of our interview questions were basically classroom scenarios. We opened with tell us a little bit about yourself. But then everything was related to classroom, walking us through a lesson plan. If this kid does this in the class, how do you react? And so then based on their responses during the interview, the final thing was a performance task or not, if we were on the same ground with what we knew we wanted to hire. And so based on those answers, if we thought we had somebody that would be a good fit, then we had them do the performance task, which was a data analysis set. And then, it would go from there. We talk about them, but there have been candidates that come in that, didn't get past those situational questions to the performance task. But I think you've really got to, in the hiring process, know what you're envisioning, what you need, and then framing that interview to let somebody show you they are going to be the fit or not the fit.
Yeah, it goes back to goodness of fit. We talked yesterday about the five stages of teacher empowerment as a school leader. Teach other teachers, be involved in curriculum, be involved in the school improvement plan, be involved in the budget, and then the holy grail, the upper, is be involved in personnel. That's what we're talking about. You want people who are your school leaders, who are your great teachers, your department chairs, who know what you need. You want them to be a part of that hiring process. So when you say to me, Dale, how do you know? I don't know that I do know who's the best, but if I put a good team together in the interview process, it's exactly what we're talking about empowerment yesterday. It's a process. Who are your best teachers? That's who you want to be your leaders, the school leaders, your teacher leaders in your building. We can't just have the folks be our school leaders who just literally and figuratively roll the ball out. We need people who have proven that they're leaders in their classroom, that are little e empowered in their classroom. And then we start them on a process to developing their school leadership. We have them do PD for other teachers. Then they get involved with the school improvement, with curriculum. Then they get involved with the school improvement plan, be on that team. And then they get involved with the budget cycle. Then we get them involved with personnel. And we're intentional, again, that word pops back up, about who our school leaders are. They have to be our best teachers. They have to be our exemplars. People ask me, what do you want me to be? Well, let me point to this person over here. I want you to be like her or him. I use them. Your school leadership team can't be composed of the good old boys and gals that just hang around the water fountain all the time. And that maybe do the annual or the yearbook or coach or whatever. And so you need the people who can actually teach to be your leaders, because that's your core competence. Now, I know in Gaffney, they think that the world revolves around the football team. I get it, but it doesn't.
I teach in Union, so.
Yeah, I know, but but Gaffney is in the upstate. Gaffney is the school that has completely lost their grip over football.
I taught there for a while, so yeah, you're right.
they're and so the community thinks that that's all there is, but it isn't. Your job is to get test scores and perform academic. Football coach coaches and you lead. I mean, that's the way that works. And so, but we can't have the football coach being a school leader that doesn't actually teach any classes. A lot of high schools, the football coach is the athletic director and doesn't even teach. How can they be a school leader? That's not our core competence. That's kind of like in the days back when we had driver's ed. I mean, we don't have school to teach kids how to drive or play football. We have, schools are for learning. They're for teaching and learning. And if you're going to build that culture, your leadership team in your building has to be about teaching and learning. And it can't just be the principal and the assistant principals. Your leadership team is that group of teacher leaders in your building. Use their expertise, use their knowledge in the hiring process of what you need.
When I made that statement, I just wanted to say when I made that statement, I don't see the strengths of not just me, but I'm talking about the other strengths in the building. I don't see those being used by our current administration. So,
well, what I've covered with you this morning seems very simple in theory, but in practice, how many times does it happen? But if you want to transform schools, what we talked about, being a servant leader, being a transformational leader, if you want to transform schools into places that are about student learning, this is how you go about doing it. It's not a mystery. We have all this notion about, oh, this hand wringing about, oh, we want to change and we want to transform, but we don't know how. I can tell you how. Pretty simple. You just got to have the political will to do it, though. You got to be brave. You got to do these things. There is an easy roadmap to how this is done. This is not rocket science here, folks. There's an easy roadmap how to do it, but now the devil's always in the details. The devil's in the doing, getting this done, doing these things, because it breaks the political cycle. It breaks with the political cycle that's been going on in schools forever. I mean, most places, the senior English teacher, you know, she was holding one of the tablets for Moses. What happens? She can't teach. What do you do? We have all these, you know, the football coach gets the, you know, the best planning time. Gets first period planning where he don't have to show up till 9 o'clock. Those kinds of things. I mean, you got to stop that. You know, we have to run school for school, period. You know, one of our colleagues who is at Gardner Webb, he was in a city school system. There's still 14 of those left in North Carolina. There's 100 county districts. There's still 14 city school districts. And he was superintendent there years and years ago. And I did an audit in one of the high schools. I was in CMS at the time, in the central office, and I did an audit in the high school there. And this was after accountability had started. I mean, this wasn't in the 80s, folks. This was in the new century. I would say it was maybe 2008 or 10 or somewhere in that neighborhood. And they were looking for a new principal, and I went in and did an audit. And what I found in that high school, and I'll just say 2010, what I found in that high school in 2010 is it looked like the 1950s. You know, there were a lot of kids in the hallway, but they weren't being disruptive. They were making banners for the pep rally during class time. You know, all that stuff from a different century, a different time, well before accountability. They weren't bothering to teach the standard course of study or any of those kinds of things to prep for the classes. And, you know, the teachers that had been there forever taught the courses, whether they got any results or not, didn't matter. They got, this is Mary's course. She gets to teach these. Does Mary get any results from those? What do you mean? Doesn't matter. Mary teaches those courses. I mean, from top to bottom, they ran it like it was 1950. And they couldn't understand why the county schools, which weren't nearly as affluent as that city school system, had passed them by in accountability. That was the whole issue. That's why they were looking for a new principal. You know, the one they had, they were retiring him, and they said, well, you know, why are we not doing better than this? I mean, Lake Norman's beating our, you know, they're beating our socks off. All these county schools are beating our socks off. We're the city school system. We're supposed to be better than this. Well, you're supposed to be, but you're not. The reason why Lake Norman's beating your socks off, where Rebecca is because they're actually having real school from modern times. And so I'm not telling you it will be easy. Servant leaders have courage. I'm telling you, but it can be done. There's a common misconception misconception around schools and school leadership is that we just don't know what to do. We've tried everything. We just don't know what to do. And so, no, we know what to do, but having the courage to do it is what we're talking about this morning. And if you're going to do it, what I've laid out for you is the blueprint on how you set up the school for a culture of teaching and learning. And that's what the master schedule does. It gives you the best opportunity to be successful with teaching and learning. Now, Steve and I have said 1,000 times, you folks are experts on that part of it, the actual delivery of instruction part. But this is how you do it organizationally. This is where that administrative part comes in. You know, you've got to have some organization to this. It can't just be eeny, meeny, miny, mo. That's not a plan. And so, speaking of plans, please remind me if I have shown you this, and if I have, I don't think that I have. So let's share. Let's see. And this will end our session this morning. And so, I apologize for not already having that open. All right. So when we talk about teaching and value added, how much impact that you have. So in EVOS, you have, EVOS is about growth accountability, and it's about value added for teachers. It's about, did this kid make a year's growth? Now, I told you pupil assignment's about who you've got. Growth is about what you do with it, and what kind of impact individual teachers have on what kinds of kids. I could have Robin Hamilton drop in and do one where she brings the principal's report and shows, the green and the yellow and the red. But basically the notion here is what kind of kids, what level kids do teachers get best results with? And do they get results at all with any kid? And so every child in the EVOS model, every child has a predictor score that says if this child scores this on this test, they've made a year's growth. That's what EVOS is all about. It's a simple regression equation. And it takes the independent variables that we know about that kid and gives us a prediction of the dependent variable, which is what score should a kid make to show a year's growth on a particular test. And so there is the formula. So what happened is with 30 plus years of data during the accountability, we ran an analysis of variance out of the database. Now, when I say we, it wasn't we. We hired a private firm, SAS Institute out of Raleigh, to do this. And we dumped all these test scores in for 20, we started at 20 years. And now we've got a little over 30 years, 31 years of test score data. And we pull out the amount of variance that all of these independent variables have. And so here they are. Here are the independent variables. Race, mother's education, father's income, teachers 10%. We assume 10%. We control for everything else. The only real variable in this is teacher. How much value they add. We control for the school district, the school, the grade, the age, the gender, and previous test scores. And so what we do out of that, and I will get to this in just a second. So here is how it works. Jamar is a third grade student in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. His independent, that should be independent, I'm sorry. His independent variables are, he's black, so he gets 20 out of 30. White would be 30, Hispanic would be 15. That's not racist, that's just what the data tells us in terms of how kids score. Mother has less than a high school diploma, that's 5 out of 15. If she'd had beyond a 4-year degree, he'd got 15. No father in home, 0 out of 15. Father's income in excess of 150 would have been 15. We know if dad makes enough money, mama stays at home, get a lot of lap time reading to kids, and that really influences beginning reading and how kids do in school. We assume the teacher will be 10. CMS, Charlotte Mecklenburg, is a high wealth district. Low wealth district would be 2. Jamar was at Billingsville. It was a takeover school, so 0. A high growth school would be 5, grade 5. He gets 5 points because he wasn't a repeater. His age, he only gets 3 because he was developmentally delayed and was a year behind. Started school at age 6. If he'd been age appropriate to his grade, he'd have got 5. Gender 5 because he's taking a math test. Female gets 4, would be the opposite if it were a reading test. Previous test scores coming out of 2nd grade is M-class data, which is now I-class data. Says he wasn't on grade level. So here's the equation. We add all those up. So he's got to make 55% of, he's got to get 55% of the raw score of the total questions, raw score on that exam, 180 questions. He's got to get 55% of them. So he's got to make 99. He's got to get 99 out of 100 questions right on the end of course, or the, end of grade math test to show a year's growth. Now, everything is controlled for except for one thing. That's the teacher. So we know if that kid made growth, that teacher added value. And but we can look at that teacher in terms of this kid is here, this kid is here. Which teachers get which results with which kids? This dispels the notion that low kids are easier to get growth out of or high kids are harder. No, this equation of controls for all of that. The only thing that's really variable here is the teacher. That's all that's variable here. We know if they're getting results or not. And so once we do that, then we build our professional development plan. And here is mine. MTSS for teachers. And it's a combination of whole group, PLC or small group, and one-on-one coaching. In best practices in teaching, not content, but process, how to teach. And I have it by quarter here, all the things that we have to do. And again, from our walkthrough data, we determine how, walkthrough data determines how long our whole group is going to last. If 95% of our teachers have adopted best teaching practices, then at the beginning of the year during that required work day, I'd do 30 minutes to remind everybody that, you know, best practices, Marzano, high yield strategies, that's the corner of the realm here. We're about teaching and learning. But now if I only got 5% that are doing best practices, I might spend all day in whole group. But then we're going to break out, we're going to work in PLCs. PLCs are going to work on, you know, non-linguistic representation is the 9 of the high yield strategies that's used the least traditionally. But we're going to bring in strategies to support high yield strategies in our PLCs at least twice a week. And we're going to do one-on-one coaching. And now here with our beginning teachers and starting second semester, our low performing teachers. And eventually we're going to get to where we can build action plans and we can dismiss people who can't teach. I'll let you look at this later. But one of the things that is when we talk about upsetting the apple cart and changing how we've traditionally done school, one of the big things in this model is unbalancing the schedule. And that is like, rocks the foundation of the school. When we talk about unbalancing the schedule, what that simply means is Stacy's a science teacher, and she's going to be my mentor. You know, I'm returning to teaching, and I hadn't taught in forever, and probably wasn't very good when I did it. And so it's been right at 40 years since I taught biology for idiots, the repeaters. And so she's going to start working with me. It doesn't do any good for me and Stacy just to sit in the lounge and talk about teaching. We're going to have to unbalance the schedule so that all the science teachers, in this case biology teachers, aren't at planning at the same time. Because guess what I need to be doing when I'm on planning? I need to be in Stacy's classroom watching her teach. And guess what Stacy needs to be doing when she's on planning? She needs to be in my classroom. And to do that is almost like, you know, the goalpost shake at the ball field. we shake the foundation so hard. If all science teachers or all biology teachers don't have planning at the same time. So we have to unbalance our master schedule. This is a big part of your mentoring program at schools is you must have your mentors and your mentees cannot have common planning, at least for the first semester. Best for the whole year. Now, after that, it's okay. We would go back and get them bounced back into the schedule. But having that, that's just one of those things. Again, we know what the plan is, and so for all mentors and mentees, and they need to be in the same curriculum. They need to be teaching the similar type courses. You know, when I started out as a young, you have to, when I started out, we still had people that, World War II veterans that were still teaching. I'm serious. They were nearing the end of their time, but, Jim McClure taught chemistry that, I wasn't going to get to teach chemistry or physics. So everybody had to start out with biology. And of course, the beginning teacher starts out with idiot biology, the repeaters. You don't even get the first time. And you have to work, back then you had to work your way up. I had been there, till I'm as old as I am now before I got, but, I was a physical and mathematical sciences, chemistry, physics, taught biology. But guess who my mentor was when I was a freshman, when I was a beginning teacher? My mentor taught geography. Let me say that again. My teaching mentor taught geography, and I'd go watch him teach. And Christopher Miller, who was a running back from us, and we called him Batman because he was blind as a bat. His glasses were so thick that they'd set paper on fire if sunlight hit them. And Christopher, I will never will forget. I was watching Ken teach geography, and he gave and he had the kids pick up maps and the list, and so they were supposed to pick up a map of the United States and put the states in it. Here was a list that was their and Christopher couldn't see well, and he'd picked up a map of Europe and was trying to put the states in it. Can't make this up. I'm telling you, you cannot make this up. But that's how I was supposed to learn how to teach physical mathematical sciences, by watching Ken teach social studies or geography. I'd say that's not a best practice. Just guessing. But that's the kind of crazy things we do, because he was available when I had planning. He was available, that kind of thing, and I'd go watch him. And so again, you got to unbalance your schedule. You've got to. We know the things to do, but now politically, that's a different story. And so as we go to our break, we'll break here at 10:15, and we'll be back at 10:25. As we go to break, I'm going to call on our local politician here to summarize this morning's session from the political realm that he always does. So, Steve, you got 2 minutes into the break.
And they're grateful for only 2 minutes. So one of the things that was talked about, and it is a political thing, is I saw a couple of the chats of what if we're a small school and there's not a pool of people to choose from for some of these areas of focus. For instance, high school AP or elementary or middle school AG would be examples. And some people position themselves to be able to teach that group of kids by getting the licensure to do it. And what do you do if they're ineffective and there's no one else licensed to do it? And these are the kinds of things. This goes back to what Dale's talking about with leadership. You've got to figure out how to convince somebody else to get licensed to do it. Or we now, and particularly in the secondary realm, and more so now, this is going to be one of those great things about COVID that we'll have to stretch ourselves to say this was a great thing. But we're going to have to look at remote learning and offering these virtual classes. AP already is in that realm because small high schools can't offer all these AP offerings anyway. And we're just going to have to look at some of these ineffective teachers and say, we're not getting results. we're going to handle it another way. From the AG realm, you're going to have to get people to agree to get licensed in that, because it is a federal program and it requires licensure. So, but this does become a political thing, as Dale talks about, because a lot of these people who have taught it for years have a voice politically in the community. And it really becomes less so of how effective they are and more so how much they're liked in the community. So the beauty of what Dale talked about with his lesson plan, his EVOS lesson plan, is we now have data and the excuses are gone. And what you're going to learn in this second half of the semester is between schedule building and assigning teachers and hiring teachers and hiring other staff and hiring principals, you have data to back up decisions. When you get into the finance realm, you've got all kinds of financial data that you can have access to. It is public record. And with that, all excuses are gone. You push a button, you can track money, period. So that's what we will be learning. And I don't know when he will have another example of Jones sausage, but I'm sure it'll come up again. And I'm going to Goldsboro next weekend for class, and I'll be going right by there, and I'll probably get emotional as I go. Let's take a break. 10 minutes.
Back at 10:25. Thank you. Let me return the cord. Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to do our section on law and court cases that have led us to where we are in public education today. Okay. So, share screen, come on. There we go. Share, break this one out. So. All right, so here is a short course on modern education, how and why we are where we are. Of course, modern education starts in 1954 with Brown versus Board of Education. We know that separate is not equal, which overruled the previous Plessy versus Ferguson and brought us into the modern schooling era. Nothing really happened from 1954 to 1965 when the Civil Rights Act was passed. And so school integration started in 1966. Dr. Laws and I were in school, and I still remember when the bus arrived that day at school with kids that didn't look like us. And we went on from there. So that happened in 1966 nationally, not just in North Carolina, but school integration started in 66, not so much as a result of Brown, but because of the Civil Rights Act of 65. So school consolidation started shortly after that, because we'd had two separate systems of schooling in the United States. We'd had the black schools and we'd had the white schools. And so there was a lot of duplication. And so school consolidations got started. Now, we think that in modern times right now that there's a lot of divisiveness in the country. Well, that's not new. One of the things that happened during that period of time in 1966 is, for example, in North Carolina, the state got out of capital funding, building schools. They shifted their money over to community colleges and started overbuilding community and technical colleges, to the point where we now have 58 community and technical colleges in North Carolina, and many of them have as many as 5 satellite campuses like Central Piedmont here in Mecklenburg County. To where now we're school poor on the community college side. We need about 25, and we've got well over 100. But the reason why we did that is we didn't want to build schools and integrate. And so we got out of capital funding. So now it is the responsibility of the local school district to actually build and maintain their buildings now, which is obviously a huge expense. But that happened in '66. With the Civil Rights Act of '65, we started all the titles 1 through 9. That's where all the federal money comes into education, from Title I to Title IX, which is equity. Those started in '65. In '69, we had Tinker versus Des Moines, which said that kids get due process rights in schools. And that basically changed how school works. Up till that time, the word of the adult was law. Kids got no due process. They didn't get to have a say. They could be treated anyway. They could be expelled from school. You name it, it could be done until that time. You know, the beatings will continue until morale improves, kind of thing. Kids could literally be beaten in school. They had no rights. And that changed things. The next big thing was, in terms of nationally, actually happened in Charlotte, was the Swan decision. That was argued and won before the Supreme Court that forced busing to integrate schools. Anybody know who the lead counsel was for the Swan folks out of Charlotte? That would be Julius Chambers. Was the lead counsel for them. For those of you who don't know who he is, look him up. He's a famous attorney in North Carolina, eventually became the chancellor of North Carolina Central. But he was the lead counsel for the Swan folks. And so we had 30 years of busing to integrate schools. We had the educational amendments of '72 that reaffirmed titles 1 through 9. And then schools changed again in a big way in 1974 with the passing of Public Law 94-142, which provided funding and the wherewithal to educate special education children. Until that time, some districts allowed those, I don't mean to be pejorative, allowed special need kids to come to school. Many of them didn't. And the few that did come basically worked with the janitor every day. But then all of a sudden, those kids had right to a public education, free and appropriate as well. Lawsuit in '75, again, I told you the country's not just divided now. There was a lawsuit by some folks in the South who wanted to overturn basically the Civil Rights Act and all the Elementary and Secondary Acts of '65, but it was upheld again in '75 with the Robinson decision. The next big watershed event across the country was a Nation at Risk and the Trouble Crusade. The Nation at Risk was a report from National Education Elementary and Secondary Education Principles that said that kids weren't learning anything in school. Diane Ravitch, a professor at Columbia, wrote a book called The Trouble Crusade that outlined how schools were failing kids. And everybody all of a sudden got worried that kids weren't learning anything in 1983. So in 1984, most states, including North Carolina and South Carolina, passed some form of an education reform bill. In North Carolina, it was called the Basic Education Plan, which said every child is due a basic education that comes to public school. Now, they didn't say much beyond that. They didn't say what a basic education was, or they didn't have any of the how-tos. It was just that every child ought to get a basic education. They did start the first attempt in North Carolina, one of the first nationally to differentiate pay for teachers, career status 1, 2, and 3, which only lasted just a brief period of time. There were 15 state pilots and then one individual pilot in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. I was actually working in one of the state pilots at that time, was principal in Burke County. We had status 1, 2, and 3. Which didn't last long because it paid teachers more, so it didn't last. But more importantly, what happened as a result of the basic education plan, we said, we don't know what a basic education is, but we're going to figure it out. So the state started writing a standard course of study, which stayed in place for over 20 years until, I guess, closer to 30. Well, it stayed in place until Common Core. So from it was fully formed in 1989. The state standard course of study, if you remember, if you're old enough, the big thick white notebooks that had the state standard course of study in them, they were fully written and implemented by 1989, and they stayed in place until Common Core. So what was that, 30 years they stayed in place until Common Core came along. But we wrote a state curriculum. And when we got the state curriculum written, somebody said, well, how are we going to know whether they're teaching it or not? So in 1989, we started the accountability program. It was initially called PBAP, Performance Accountability System. And then that became the state ABCs program, which is now the state report card. And so we started integrating into course testing, for those of you who don't know. And then we eventually went to integrate is in grades 3 through 8 into courses for high school courses. And then we had Dibbles M class, and now what we call it I class for the data, for the assessment data in K2. So that's where all that came from. Then the watershed case in school finance that we'll actually have one of our case studies on was Leandro case. It continues even today. But there was a lawsuit by low wealth districts to change the state funding formula. We have a flat grant system of funding. It didn't change the funding formula, but it did start the state lottery. That's how we got the education lotteries is around the country. It was out of the Leandro case. That's why they're called education lotteries. They said, we won't change how we fund schools, but we will create a fund that basically is pork barrel, that we can give money, capital money to low wealth districts. And of course, it's just been pork barrel. It's been highly politicized, and there's not much money. By the time you pay the lottery company, you pay out the winners and all those, there's just a few pennies left, and it's made no difference. But the important part here, and we're going to pause here and go through this one, is that we did not change the funding formula. And that's what we're going to talk about. And then the last thing in this section, you notice there's a break here, is that we allowed schools to resegregate as a result of the Capuchon lawsuit, which again had to be in Charlotte because that's where the Swan case was, and it sought to and so after 30 years, Swan was overturned, and we stopped busing for integration, and the court went a little further and said if schools resegregate, the state nor the district has any duty to fix it. And so we resegregated overnight. It was one of those things where we thought it would take 10 years for schools to resegregate. It took 10 minutes. It was amazing how quick schools resegregated. But let's talk about school funding and the Leandro case. That's going to be one of our case studies this semester. In North and South Carolina, you get state funds. And those state funds are based on how many kids attend your school every day. That's called ADM, Average Daily Membership. You don't get money based on how many are enrolled. You get money on how many attend. That's why it's so important to take your attendance every day, because at the end of the month, it's done electronically now. The PMR is filed monthly. That's Principal's Monthly Report, PMR, and that's attendance. And so you get a per pupil. It comes to the district, but it is based on the students that you have. We're going to use round numbers here. Say you've got 1,000 students enrolled at your school, and your attendance for that month is 95%. So the state will not send a check, $8,000 per pupil, for 1,000 students. They'll send it for 950 students, because that's how many attended. So that's why attendance is important, and that's why your principal's always on you about getting your attendance in. But now, to further that notion, when the state sends that check, they don't send the $8,000 at one time. They they divide into 10 monthly installments, and they send 800 at a time minus the absence. So they send 750 per month. So that month, of that $800 per kid, you get 750 times the number of kids you got. We don't give you all the money. So that's one of the fallacies about charter schools that folks have is that a kid starts in a charter school, and after the first month, he comes back to the public school, and they say, but the charter school got all the money. No, they got the money for that month that he was there. But when he came back, you get the money now. The state doesn't send the whole $800. I mean, the whole $8,000 at the beginning of the year. They pay after, and they pay modified accrual accounting system. They pay only 1/10. So you've heard about the 20 days. We get teachers based. So after the first 20 days, we count how many you got, and that's the state bases their money, and they send you money based on that, minus your absenteeism, 1/10 of that. Now, and please remember, they pay after. You have to have a month's operating budget. You pay as a district at the end of the first month, they reimburse you, and it works that way every month. You pay, they reimburse. That way, if you spend money that you weren't supposed to, or on something you weren't supposed to spend it on, they don't give it back to you. They don't give you the opportunity to misspend their money. That's the thing to remember here. Now, what does this state money per pupil pay for? By and large, about 85% of it pays for teacher salaries. It pays for teacher salaries. That's where your teacher allotment comes. When you get to be principal, you'll get an allotment of teachers. The feds pay for, as we said, Title I, EC 504, your CTE teachers, your AIG teachers, and your English as a second language. They pay their salaries. So they call the tune. They call the dance on those. They tell you how you can use those because they're paying their salaries. Back in the days before electronic deposit, when I used to have to go give out checks as a principal, I had 3 different colored checks. I had blue and pink and yellow. And the reason why I had different colored checks for teachers is what funding source they were being paid for. If I remember correctly, the blue checks for the state people. That's what we're talking about. The state allotted positions, they got a blue check. The federal folks got a yellow check. And then if you had any locally paid teachers, and local districts can hire teachers, they can't afford many. I think those were pink. We don't have hard copy checks anymore. It's all done electronically, but the notion is still the same. We have teachers that are federally paid, we have teachers that are state paid, and we have local teachers. Now, in terms of how you use them, federal is the most restrictive, local is the least restrictive, but state also says how you can use them. But they allot you these positions, and you get to use them how you see fit. But you have to stay within the guidelines of those class size limits. You can't just say, I'm going to hire 6 English teachers and just 2 math teachers. You can't find math teachers. But those 2 math teachers can't have 100 in their class. They have a limit on how many they can have in their class. So pretty much we know how many English teachers we're going to need, how many math, and the state pays those based on, and they allot those based on those class size limits. Again, I told you the state laws for planning time and scheduling. Let me share that with you, and I have that in here. Let me do a quick share here if I can get my screen to share. There it goes. Share is lagging today. Come on, you can do it. Here it is. Legal planning time for instructional time, and it says all these things, and it has your class size. And so this is all the state laws that say what they're going to fund and not going to fund, and all these different things, and what class sizes and those kinds of things. So they tell you, so they allot you English teachers in a high school based on 30 you get 1 English teacher for every 30 kids that you are, 1 position for every 30 kids that you've got. You say, but Dale, the class size limit is 27. They get You get a 3%, what is it, 10% overage, 3 teachers. So they don't fund you, they fund you at the 10% over level. So you're always just, you're right on the edge. And that's why sometimes when you've got additional numbers and you're just a few over and you didn't get enough students to have an extra teacher, but you're going to be overloaded, that's where those local funds come in. You can put those local funds in. And that's what the Leandro lawsuit was about is these low wealth districts said, we get the same amount as the state, as everybody else in the state, but they have the ability to add a little more to theirs so they can make things a little better. And what we want you to do is to equalize the funding. So instead of us everybody getting $8,000 per year per pupil, we want you to give the low wealth districts $6,000 and give us 10, and they can add money to, they're adding $4,000 to that. So in the end, we both end up with $10,000 per pupil. And the state said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to give it flat still. We'll start a lottery to give you low wealth districts a little bit of extra money if we can. And if your state representative has enough clout, you know, in the General Assembly, we'll do some pork barrel projects and some pork barrel money. But we're not going to take money from the wealthy and give to the poor. We're not going to rob it. We're not going to do that. We're going to put in some other things to make sure that you're getting what you need, but we're not going to take from you, give to the low wealth so that you both end up the same. We have no duty for you to both be the same. As long as you're getting that basic education, and we believe that $8,000 per pupil will pay for a basic education. And that's all you're legally guaranteed is a basic education. We're not going to fund you beyond that. If you want to fund yourself beyond that, that's fine, but we're not going to take from the wealthy and give to you. You only get that basic education. We've determined that it's $8,000. We're not required to give you more than that. Not only that, you are not to take state money that we give you and attempt to do that with it. How would you go about doing that? Well, what about if you had different schools in your district? Mary's in Wake. Mary, is there a difference economically in different schools in Wake County?
Yes, but there probably shouldn't be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, the answer is yes. We have discrepancies or disparities in our districts. I'll use Charlotte-Mecklenburg as an example. You know, if you're at Ardrey Kill down in the Ballantyne area, they've got everything. They've even got artificial turf at their football stadium. Their football stadium's nicer than ours at Gardner-Webb. They've got everything that you would want there. They've got it all. But there's other schools like Garinger and Center City that's just, you know, it's awful. So if I took that state money, would it be legal for me to take under the basic ed plan and the Leandro decision and the funding formula in the state? Would it be legal for me as the superintendent to say, I'm going to figure out a plan where I'm going to take money that instead of giving $8,000 per pupil to Ardrey Kell that has all this local wealth and can raise money on their own. And these kids have natural advantages already. I'm going to take money from them and I'm going to shift it over here to Garinger. Well, what Leandro said is you can't do that either. Not only are we not going to do it, you can't do it inside your district either. Again, basic education says all those kids at Garinger are guaranteed as a basic education. We're giving them enough money for that. You can't take from Ardrey Kell and give to Garinger. You're not allowed to do that. So when we have the letter to from the superintendent, this is what we're talking about. And you're going to have to do your research on the Leandro case. But I'm going to go ahead and be kind to you so I won't yell and scream and throw stuff and break my laptop. No, the superintendent can't do that. That's what Leandro says. So the state has no duty to make sure everybody gets the same. Their duty is a basic education. And you cannot, at the local district level, You cannot manipulate funds either. Money has to be spent as it is intended. So again, I'm going to pause. So that's the legal background at this point before we start talking about the modern era of schooling, the second wave, which is No Child Left Behind, when that kicks in. So we're going to talk about from 1954 to 2000, we're going to talk about, or 2001, we're going to talk about, we're going to have any questions. So that is the context for schooling. That's the underpinning that where we are so far with schooling. Now, a layer on top of that, accountability, comes in next that has several functions, but I'm going to pause now. You have any questions on the context of why public schooling is where it is right now legally? Steve?
No, we won't go in heavily to finance. I may, before the day's out, show a little bit of how a district budget looks, but in essence, when your principal gets a budget from the district, it comes in dollars and positions. A superintendent will get a budget from the state, and when Dale talks about federal monies are kind of a flow through. So the state is the one that tells you how much you get from the feds, and it is the most, and again, South Carolina is a little bit different, but not substantially different. It's an archaic funding piece because your teachers and your support, your auxiliary personnel, your guidance counselors, your media people, your school nurses, and your social workers, these folk come in position allotments. Your administrators come in months of employment, which is not in positions, but in months of employment. That's why some of your assistant principals are 10 months, some of them are 11 months, some of them are 12 months. It's whatever the district can figure out with the school of what they can afford in months of employment, and if they would be willing to use local money to up the months of employment for administrators. So the beauty of that is that now there's a ceiling of how much the state will pay on a salary, but salaries aren't really worked into this. So if we have a bunch of 30-year teachers at a certain pay scale, we pay them out of state money because they are position allotments, not dollar allotments. You pay your least expensive people out of your local budget because those are dollars that you have. So it's a lot of stuff to process. What Dale, I think, is hitting on here is that Wake County, even though there's disparity within it, Mary, also can afford to use local monies because of a substantial tax base that down the road, when I go to Goldsboro, Wayne County cannot afford. And so that's why there's all kinds of positions that are additional in Wake County. If we go to South Carolina, our South Carolina friends can relate to this. Clover is right below Gaston County where I live. They've got a nuclear facility. They tear down schools that are 10 years old and build a new one. And you go another 35, 40 minutes down 321 to Fairfield County, and they have no money at all. And so this is what Leandro is trying to address to a certain extent, to level the playing field. It does not level the capital playing field, but it does the personnel and resource playing field. So
that's a long response to, I don't think that it is nice to have a vision that we're going to level the playing field everywhere. As long as we're America, I don't think it's ever going to be level. We just need to figure out as close as we can get to offering a fairness piece for students. And you know, I don't know how we're going to address it any more than that we offer a basic education, and hopefully it's good enough. It hasn't shown to be at this point, but we keep working at it. I saw the comment on Leandro. I know you're going to talk more about Leandro, Dale. It's such a critical factor. By the way, when I do the finance piece in EDLS, and I don't do it a whole lot now, we have people that are currently superintendents that teach it because they're more up to speed with what's going on now. But South Carolina, as we talked about this before, the Leandro of North Carolina is the corridor of shame in South Carolina. And so, and a lot of you can relate to that, the 95 corridor, going down below Sumter and on down. So it's you know, the disparity of funding is profound. And you know, right now, the South Carolina legislature has worked really, really hard to not address that, it seems to me. And the North Carolina legislature is trying really to work very hard not to address Leandro. So that's where we are. I'll let you catch your breath, Dale. It's your turn again.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Now, one of the things in what we're talking about this morning is the notion of you can't move state funds around, but you can move some local funds around. And so the idea is, we're talking about Mary in a district that has wealth, like at Wake. The local can do some things to try to adjust, but you can't just do it off the cuff. And that's part of the case study that we have. Understanding how budgets work. School boards in North and South Carolina are unempowered. What that means is they don't levy their own tax money. They have to go to the funding authority, which is the county commissioners. They pass a budget themselves, the school board. They present that budget to the county commissioners. And that's where the politics, that political piece comes in. And so you just can't be moving money around because you want to. The board members have to approve that, and then that approved budget, and you have to spend it as it's approved. And part of the problem, even inside of districts, is we have district representation on school boards, and we have political partisan people on school boards who don't want to take local money and manipulate it so that one school might get more than another. We don't want that to happen. An example was in Charlotte-Mecklenburg in the mid-90s. They were called the Gang of Four. They were one particular political party. They ran and got on the county commission together, and their burning issue was the high school challenge. 3 high schools in Charlotte-Mecklenburg were given $3 million to try to improve them. According to Leandro, they were not being successful. It was Garinger and West Charlotte and West Meck. They needed additional support, and so the board had started what was called the High School Challenge, and the county commissioners, the existing group, had funded it $3 million. These 4 people beat that drum and got elected based on giving $3 million, as if that was all the money in the world. Let me put that $3 million in perspective. The budget in Charlotte-Mecklenburg at that time was $1.4 billion. That $3 million was less than 0.25% of the budget. And they convinced the public that that was all the money in the world, that was the entire budget was being blown on these 3 high schools. That's how politicized moving money from one school to another is. And so just like in our case, the superintendent decides that he wants to do this. Well, first, he can't move federal funds, can't move state funds. And without board approval and without county commissioner, if it's not in the budget that was passed, you can't move local funds either. And so, you know, that's the issue here is you got 3 streams of funding and you can only do with them what's been approved for you to do with them. You don't have a lot of just that D word, that dirty word, discretion. You don't have discretion. The local itself, the superintendent can go to the board and the board to the county commissioners, but whatever they approve, that's what you do. You cannot, you spend money exactly as it comes. The problem is sometimes it doesn't come. That's what we're talking about, corridor of shame. When you get south of the border on 95 in South Carolina and what's going on in places in North Carolina, we're trying to get the state, the General Assembly to do the right thing. But then the problem is the local districts have now become politicized and won't do the right thing. Again, that's that divided country that we're talking about. We're still fighting the Civil War. We're still fighting the Civil Rights Act. We're still fighting all these battles. And it's not like we just started today. We had several runs at ESA, the Elementary and Secondary School Act, with all the titles. We had lawsuits trying to overturn those all the way through. So we're still battling that. But the notion here for a school principal is know what funds you have and know how you can spend them. And if you don't spend them as allotted, it won't go well for you. And so those are the things that you have to know. Yeah. Mary says she was at West Mac in 2015 and how much help they need. Well, all the schools on the West Side do, but it's a political thing. We don't want to give them any additional funds. We don't want to, it's still that, bootstrap, pull yourself up, but we're in such a situation that we can. But again, the local budget is very political, but you can't do anything that the county commissioners that gave you the money said you couldn't do. For example, in Chapel Hill, Carborough, that is a school district in North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Now, that's a city system. It is not the county, which is orange. It is the city. Now, it's the tale of 2 cities. Chapel Hill is wealthy and educated, and all the folks who work at Chapel Hill at UNC, and then Carborough is not. And so the previous superintendent that got fired summer before last, she attempted to do what our case study talks about. She is attempting to direct local funds to the Carborough side of the equation. Well, a retired principal from Chapel Hill, whose daughter was in a Chapel Hill school, stood up and said, I know the law. This is illegal with what she's doing. So what she was doing was she was trying to direct more resources to the Carborough folks. Well, again, who pays state salaries? And salaries can be tracked. You got to have local money if you don't use state money. And so what she did was she hired a education consulting firm to come in and work in the Carborough schools. And so it's an indirect way to get additional support to those schools in terms of personnel. And you say, well, how much money can a superintendent, how much money does a superintendent have discretionary? Well, in Chapel Hill, Carborough, the superintendent can spend up to $90,000 a year on discretionary without having to go back through the Board of Education or the commissioners that granted the money, $90,000. So she contracted with this educational consulting firm to come in and work within these low wealth schools in Carborough, $1 million, but she had it broken up into 12 payments, so it came under $90,000. That's against the law. It's $90,000 total, not $90,000 just one time. And so she ended up going on sick leave and resigning. They fired the finance officer immediately. But it was simply an attempt to circumvent the law, which says you can't do that. Again, Leandro says that the state will not give extra or manipulate funds, but you can't do it either. And this was a direct attempt for her to manipulate the funds of the district to get extra support for some of those low wealth kids and low wealth kids on that side of town. Now, that's not really a low wealth area, but there are at-risk kids a lot more in Carrboro than there are in Chapel Hill, is the whole notion here. And she was trying to get them some extra support. Now, the idea was a good idea, but again, you can't manipulate funds. You can't do things like that. Obviously, you couldn't hire teachers, so she did the next best thing. She hired a company that had teachers. And so, that they were trying to get support for their at-risk kids. And again, facilities, that's one thing, but they were trying to get extra teachers, lower class sizes, do the things that we know that it takes to try to make a difference on the academic piece. One of the fallacies in the school business is we think that facilities equals achievement. It doesn't. I can tell you for 15 years, my wife taught at the lab school at Davidson College, which was a magnet school, a public magnet school, countywide magnet, there at Davidson, at the old Davidson High School. It was the worst facility in the county. Had the highest test scores in the state because of who they had, not the building that they were in. And so we make that mistake too many times. If I step on somebody's toes, it's intentional here. I go to Chester from time to time, and that series of schools down at Chester, what a nice facility, but some of the lowest scoring schools in the state in terms of what goes on inside of some of the nicer facilities in the area. So when we're talking about getting support for kids, we're talking about instructional support, what you folks do, extra teachers, extra programs, extra support, those kinds of things. And you'd think, well, surely people would understand that would be worth funding. Not really. So again, the whole notion of this section is, down in Chester, where that they have 3 schools right there together in that facility, an intermediate and an elementary, really, really, really nice. They're on 9 coming into Chester, like coming off of 77 on 9 heading toward Chester. Beautiful facility. Been there multiple times.
I taught at Great Falls for a year. So, and it's the redheaded stepchild of Chester County anyway. But
and a marvelous facility, but not very. Their scores are terrible. So it's not about facilities a lot of times. There's other things involved in that. And again, to the example of my wife, they had the highest test scores in the state, but they had the 240 brightest kids in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Out of 140,000 kids, they picked the 240 brightest. As I told you, I tease her all the time. Most important person in their organization was the custodian. As long as they could get the front door open every morning, the scores were going to walk right in. I mean, you couldn't come unless you were a genius level kid. But they had the worst facility. They had to do Meals on Wheels. Their cafeteria was condemned. I mean, it was no heat, no air conditioning, terrible facility, but no technology. Kids brought their own. And so that's what we're talking about, is getting extra support, instructional support, not just facility support and things, capital. Those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. So let's resume. Let's resume our list of court cases. Now we move into the secondary modern era, which is No Child Left Behind. And one of the things that we've talked about and that we hit upon is bang for your buck. And so for 10 years, we told people get the best bang for your buck. So if you're, when you're talking about student achievement, and we would scale kids on a scale of 1 to 4, basically what we told schools is forget about your 1s. Even if you improve them, they're still not going to make a 3 on the test. They're not going to improve enough to do that. We don't care about their growth. It's all about comparative accountability. We need them all to be at proficient level, which is 3 out of 4. And these 1s, they're not ever going to make it. We did this for 10 years now, folks. From 1991 to 2001, for 10 years, we said, forget about, let's get bang for the buck. Let's forget about those 1s. Let's work with those high 2s. Did we talk about that, the ethics of that in one of our case studies the first half? But for 10 years, that's what we said we ought to be doing. Why do you think that, whether you agree with it or whether you don't, or whether it was done for the right reasons, the notion is we have taught schools to throw kids for 10 years to throw the lowest kids away. We've done a model where we did, a cost benefit analysis, and it wasn't worth our time to work with these kids. Judge Manning said of Charlotte Mecklenburg, it's genocide what y'all are doing to kids. We had a superintendent who came in. Now, quote me accurately here. I did not say publicly that he was a pinhead. What I said publicly is he could wear a thimble for a hat. When he came in and said, we're going to stop all of your remedial programs in high school. We said, well, what about, I don't care about these kids. We're going to put all of our money in pre-K, and in 10 years, all the kids you get in high school will be on grade level. Well, what are we going to do with all these kids in this team? They don't care. We had the group that got elected. We did away with the high school challenge. We did away with remediation in high school. We stopped relooping. We stopped hiring reading and math remediation teachers. We put all our money in pre-K and AVID, and off we went. And then, of course, when it went back to court, Judge Manning said, what y'all are doing is genocide. That's what was happening. That's why No Child Left Behind got put back in, because state said, hey, in the accountability era, let's just work with the kids we can get results out of. Forget the rest of them. Maybe they'll drop out and get out of our way. They'll go somewhere else. If they're not old enough to quit, maybe their parents will take them somewhere else. We'll be done with them. And so that's how we got to No Child Left Behind, for good or for bad. Said that kids don't have to go to low performance schools. They don't have to go to dangerous schools. We'll talk about that in one of our case studies, but we'll get to what that means. That that you can't, if you have too many acts of crime or too many acts of violence, your kids can go somewhere else to school. We'll reform that school, and we'll talk about that most specifically a little bit later this semester. But that's what No Child Left Behind was. We basically said, we're leaving these kids behind. And we did it. I mean, it wasn't like we did it secretly. How many workshops, if some of you are old enough, how many workshops did you go to that said, we're just going to work with these I2s? Focus on the ones we can get results out of. We did it as, we institutionalized this discrimination against these kids. We did. We most certainly did. We only worked with the ones that we thought we could get just over the line. We even, we even had to do this notion of, retesting quickly to try to get them just over that hump, which is just chance, luck. Are they better guessers this time around? We didn't do any additional instruction. How many times we're doing that? And finally, some of us had to say, well, you can't count those scores. And they said, well, why can't you? I said, well, you're not giving them any more instruction. You're just giving them the kids that are right underneath the passing level, 70, that are 65 to 69. You're giving them a chance to be lucky. They said, well, what's wrong with that? Well, the problem with that is, statistically, is You didn't give the kids who scored from 70 to 74, you didn't give them a chance to be unlucky. So if we, every time we administer those tests, if we give them to all of them, the number of kids passing would be the same. Some of them would switch from passing to failing, but it would be the same. I mean, we got it down to art here. We were just working with those that were close. We were retesting those that were close. It enforced a system on us in public education where we threw kids away intentionally. And because the money, the laws, basic ed, we're only giving you this much. We only fund a basic ed. We expect production out of you. We want accountability. We want to be able to go to the country club and brag about how our school beat your school. We can't compete in football. So, but we want, we're competing this, it gave parents bragging rights. You got to have somebody to beat. You're not out there running on your own. I mean, it's only a race if there's more than one in it. And that's the dark side of school accountability. And that's our history. We absolutely did those things. Now, we're trying to do better now, especially with value added and understanding it's about growth. It's about moving kids. But now our recent history has not been very good. And we still have a lot of folks who are in that mode, in that competition mode, that if we take this and give to those, then we're hurting, we're taking something from us. So Elizabeth says, sounds like most of those, what does Elizabeth? Go ahead and open your mic up, Elizabeth. Make that point for us.
I just said that it sounds like most of those who were left behind were millennials, yes, like me, who were still in elementary and middle school. Mm-hmm. And then we throw all this crap on millennials, but I mean, they are the people who got left behind, and there's a reason why they don't like institutions. There's a reason why they're not participating in society. There's a reason why that they don't want to work for minimum wage because they've been relegated to that in their lives. They're the people who were thrown away. They're the lost generation that we didn't care about. And they know that. Whether they knew why or not, they know that society didn't care about them. So they don't care much about society and choose not to participate. This is how you destroy democracy. What was the purpose of public school to begin with? We had private schools at the time this country was founded. Harvard is older than the country. For the children of wealthy landowners, we've had private education. Public education is provided for in the preamble to the Constitution. It is not in the Bill of Rights. It is in the preamble to the Constitution that states may provide public education. And I'll just summarize it for the great unwashed, common people. That was the whole notion. That's the foundation of our democracy, is public education. And then all of a sudden we said, it's okay to throw these kids away. And so we have a whole generation of young people who were disenfranchised from the very beginning in public school, intentionally, in order to do well in accountability. We disenfranchise these kids. And as a result, back to the list, as a result, we have seen alternatives. We've already talked about value added, where all of a sudden we said, wait a minute, we need to see what's going on here. Every kid deserves an education, deserves a good teacher. But what we've seen as a result of this disenfranchising is vouchers, charter schools, moving money from masters so that we can fund other initiatives, elimination of career status to try to get teachers, so that we can start some alternative forms of education, like charter schools and public and private schools that get state money through vouchers. That's why these things have formed. Now, part of that is a movement from the General Assemblies in North and South Carolina to drive salaries down as well. We know that charter schools don't pay everybody the same.
So now Stacy and I, if we went to the charter school, we would get our full salary, might even get a bonus, and we'd get benefits because they can't find math and science teachers. But now, unfortunately, Mary, English teacher, they would struggle. Maybe they probably would pay her scale or maybe a little less. But if a PE teacher, they don't even pay them scale. They pay them as a substitute with no benefits in charter schools. They have differentiated the salary and benefit structure. That's one of the things that the states would like to do in order to give less money to public education. But the rise of those things happened because public education was leaving many kids behind intentionally because of accountability. That was never the intent. The intent is for everybody to do well, but in practice, what happened was we just abandoned certain kids. They weren't worth the effort. We were doing cost benefit analysis. We've got these resources. And so Elizabeth is exactly correct. We threw away a whole generation of kids intentionally. So our history has not been stellar here, folks, but we're trying to do better. We're trying to make schools, the culture is teaching and learning. And we're trying to identify teachers who can teach and facilitate them and help those who can't to be teachers and those who can't teach that can't be helped to do something else. Theory versus practice usually fall. Practice always falls short. That's the way it works. But the notion here is we need to measure how well teachers do, and we need to help them. Again, back to the Collins model. Again, the shortcoming is the notion is we get good people and get them on the. What if there is no good people to get? We have to make them all good people. We have to have a system in place that takes whatever we get and either produces a teacher out of it or a new worker for Walmart. We get another. That's what we have to do as school administrators. That's our job every day. That's got to be our hedgehog concept back to college, is that I'm going to build great teachers every day. That's what we have to do. They don't show up at your doorstep anymore. And again, to Elizabeth's point, many of the millennials, even if they made it to college, they don't like education. It didn't serve them. They were not facilitated. They know that they didn't get what they were supposed to get. They're not happy campers. They are not happy campers. So that they're not going to run over top of you and be happy to come and work in public education. They many times homeschool their own kids or go look for charters or alternatives. Homeschool is a big part of why homeschooling got started. Parents realized that their kids were not being facilitated. On Wednesday night, this is kind of a non sequitur here, but on Wednesday night, when I'm grading and working, I turn on the outdoor channel. You don't have to pay attention. I don't watch hunting shows, but I do like the gun shows, the shooting shows. And so they had one on, and it was Jerry Mikulik is most famous pistol shooter in the world, not hunter, target shooter. His daughter, but they homeschooled her, and she was on, and she's talking about all the things that she wants. She's 24 years old. All the things that she wants to do in her life. But her parents homeschooled her because where they're from in Louisiana, they don't care about people like her. Now, her dad's in that part of the world, one of the most famous. They're not wealthy, but one of the most famous people in the world. But understanding their last name is Mikulik, that they're Cajun people. They're discriminated against in that part of the world. They don't matter. And that's what they were talking about is she's a fine young woman who's a tremendous shooter, but she's doing a lot of things other than just shooting. She's using her notoriety or fame or whatever to do all this charitable work and these good deeds through their church and some other things. But She didn't attend public school because they knew that she wouldn't have a chance. She wouldn't matter in public school. She just wouldn't matter. I mean, that's the latest example. I mean, just this past Wednesday, I saw this, that in that part of the world, she wouldn't matter. And so we have driven a lot of people to homeschooling, public school, public separates, which are charters, that's called a public separate, and privates. And there's a reason why we threw these kids away. I'm going to pause and catch my breath. This segment has lasted an hour. Steve, I'll let you conclude. We've not lasted an hour. We're on 50 minutes, right where we 10:25. Yeah, we're on an hour. So Steve,
give me 2 minutes again.
I beg your pardon?
2 minutes. Is that what you give me? 2?
That's right.
One of the things that we need to keep in mind as well, and one of the real challenges for public schools and any school, is that Dale is passionate, as you can tell, and all of you are, on kids we've thrown away. We also need to remember that we've had a propensity to throw away the upper kids. The AG kids, and so a lot of these charters and privates and homeschools are the result of those kids being disenfranchised as well. And they're the same problem with a different context. Obviously, the higher performing kids have access to a lot more resource and support from home, typically, not always. So they at least have a better shot at life, if you will. But these are all challenges we have to take into consideration. So as we hear about this, certainly the law, No Child Left Behind, the law, Leandro, these things are trying to fix the disparity of opportunity. But we also need to remember that sometimes we leave other kids behind too. Have a good break. Come on, 10 minutes?
Yeah, we'll be back on at 11:35. The biggest mistake that you can make in fundraising is to think that you can delegate that to some group and that you're done with it. You are not. You can delegate the activity, but not the responsibility. You are still accountable for what they do or don't do. Those monies, same process as money that comes to your school. It's got to be accounted for. It's got to be receipted. Any purchases they make, purchase orders, the whole deal. And so people say, well, we give that to our PTA to do. Well, okay, they can do the activity, but you're still responsible. And if you don't, you'll be charged with failure to maintain fiscal responsibility, and you'll lose your job. And you may have to repay some of that money. And so booster groups, Steve was talking about, he used one of their vehicles. They think that stuff is theirs. No, you're responsible for it. If they raise the money through the auspices of the school, you're responsible for that. If they order a bunch of fruit from Indian River and don't distribute it and it rots and people want their money back, that's on you. All the accounting, everything that goes along with that comes back to the principal's office. It's got to be run through all of your accounts. You have special accounts at your school. You have two. That's one of them. Athletics, booster clubs, they're the worst. Go out and buy uniforms and do things like that and not have enough money and then come to you. I had that situation myself one time when I became principal of a junior high school, and they had decided to change the school mascot and the school colors and ordered all brand new uniforms and done all this stuff. Didn't have the booster club decided to do that. Didn't have any money to pay for it. And Bocock Stroud, which was an athletic supplier there in Charlotte, wanted a couple $100,000. I don't have that kind of money. What are you talking about? Well, these people made this obligation. And so that's the one that will get you the fastest at the local school level is fundraising in terms of not being in compliance with all the things that the auditor says that you need to be in compliance with. Now, understanding your books are going to be audited every spring. Now, the auditor is not going to talk about whether they're going to talk about did you follow all the procedures and spend money according to how it was. But now they won't talk to you about how smart that was or how dumb that was to spend this money. But they just want to make sure you follow all the laws. And one of the things that they'll be looking for too is I found when I took over a high school, the first thing that you ought to do is ask for an audit, where all the money is. And that's what I did. And what I found is we were in the hole in a big way. But the way that they had been covering that was to count the scholarship fund that we had, that money that was held in trust for a scholarship, and using the interest to pay a couple of free scholarships there at the high school. They were adding that into the assets of the school to cover up that we owed everybody in town. We still owed, the yearbook people, Jostens. We hadn't paid the Sheridan Hotel over at the airport where they'd had the last prom. We owed that. I mean, we owed everybody for everything. We hadn't paid Johnston's for the annuals. I mean, we owed Pepsi-Cola like $30,000. We had been taking the money out of the vending machines and spending it and not giving them the money. And I mean, we'd done about everything you could think of. We'd been doing, we had been doing wrong. And we were covering it up with adding that bank account, that money that in that endowment that we couldn't touch. And so when we got down to the bottom of things, I needed $60,000 immediately. I mean, I needed more than that. I needed $60,000 immediately just for operating. Those are the kinds of things that these laws are designed to prevent. But you better make sure. You better make sure, especially if you're in a large district where people might not be paying attention, or you've been through 2 or 3 changes of administration. You better ask for an audit of your accounts immediately, so that you know where you are. And the first thing I would do is I would suspend all fundraising until I could figure it out. Now, each district has their rules on fundraising. They're supposed to be approved before it happens by the superintendent. They're not supposed to compete with local businesses. Let's go back to our screen share here. There are local policies on when you're not supposed to trade state money for local money. Dale, what does that mean? Who pays for teachers? State does. Can't have teachers during instructional time when the state's paying them to teach out and raising money. How many times have you seen that? Barbecues and other things that you got teachers working at. I was principal at a 7th and 8th grade school in Rutherford County down in Ellenboro. We ran the county fair we had property there. We would take the money, the profits, and buy more property and run the fair. And when I became principal, I said, I will only do this if we give the money back to the school and some to the teachers. Well, people thought I was crazy. There's a reason why I only stayed there a short period of time. Give teachers and classrooms money from the fair. We need to buy more property. The fair became an entity of its own. The whole notion of having the fair, the Ellenboro Fair, was to raise money for the school. Oh, we don't want to spend it on the school. But we didn't go in the building for 2 weeks. We were doing the fair. We had the fair every day for a week in the evenings. They took up our parking lot, put up the rides, and did the whole thing. I mean, it became crazy. But we were spending state money in terms of teacher administrative salaries to run the fair to get local money. That's a bad trade. For every dollar you raise that you have access to and control of locally, you spend 10 or more state dollars to get it when you do that kind of stuff. See, what fundraising in that aspect is an attempt to use state money that you have no control over to get local money that you do have control over. Well, the state says you can't do that. You're not to use instructional time for the purposes of fundraising. You're not to do that. You have to do pre-numbered tickets. You have to do reconciliation at ball games, deposit the money. The money you raise has to benefit the school program, have to be approved prior. All of those kinds of things have to be done. Fundraising is where you get in the most trouble financially at a school. How you raise it, what you spend it on, getting in trouble, having parent groups and other groups get involved. The money, how many times have you seen the PTA abscond with the money? Every week, there's somebody that has made off with the money. Well, even though you didn't take it, a principal in Charlotte Mecklenburg had an accident. Those, tried to get away for a weekend right before school started. That weekend before school started a few years back, went to the beach, was in an accident, was in the hospital and couldn't come back to work for a couple months. And while she was gone, the bookkeeper wrote checks, and stole the money, and and the PTA stole the money while she was gone. When she came back, she was responsible for that. She was responsible. You are maintain fiscal control. And the PTA took her absence as an opportunity to embezzle all the money. We see it 1,000 times a year across the United States. PTAs embezzle the money. The school secretary that's the bookkeeper writes themselves checks. It's a constant. It will be your biggest battle, trying to manage those local funds and keep them, don't violate all the policies, raising the money and don't violate them, spending them and keeping people from stealing it or misusing it or squandering it. We were going to have this big fundraiser, but it rained and nobody came, but we still had all the expenses. We poisoned people at the barbecue and had to pay doctor bills. That one happened just this past, right before the pandemic. A barbecue poisoned a bunch of people. They had all kind of bills to pay over that. I mean, fundraising it's not, I don't know that it's a necessary evil. I just say it's an evil. But sometimes you inherit schools that have traditional things. I inherited a couple of those myself in my career that are just bad from day one. You do what you have to do, and you try to do the best that you can do. I'll pause and give Steve a chance to chime in from the superintendent's perspective on fundraising.
The story that comes to mind for me on this, and this is an important piece. If you're going to do a fundraiser, if you're going to solicit money from businesses, and a lot of what principals do is to hit businesses to contribute to this or this, buy yearbook ads or contribute to this particular cause that we're doing at school. And when you heard Dale say that the protocol is to go through the district office to get permission to do these things. And I can remember that we were working out, I and our director of development that we had in Wilkes County, and most districts don't have that, but we did because we needed to raise money, and he was really good at it. And we were working on this individual to give a substantial gift to Wilkes County Schools, about $500,000. And one of the schools went to him to see if he would support them, and I don't remember what the endeavor was, for about $5,000. And it ended up that this guy called us and said, well, I decided I'm going to support X high school. And instead of $500,000, he felt good that he was helping the school for $5,000. And I know you have trouble picturing that I blew my gasket, but I blew my gasket. And I said, well, that'd be great, X high school. See if you can raise another $495,000 to give to us, because that's what we were expecting at that time. Thankfully, we a few hot dog meals, lunches later, because he loved hot dogs, the benefactor believed in what we were doing as a district and contributed. But I think that I think the story that goes with this is that when districts put protocols in place, schools tend to want to be independent. And when I was a school principal, and you've heard Dale tell his stories, you want to be independent. You want to do your own thing, run your own show. As a principal, you do, as faculty at that school, because we are somewhat independent in many ways. But there's a bigger picture, and that's, in truth, how you've experienced EDCI, right? You are looking at curriculum from a bigger picture angle, and this curricular endeavor may work at this school, but not at this school. It may work at this classroom, but not at this classroom. You look at a bigger picture, and what we're doing with MELS is looking at how to manage a school in the context of working within the parameters of a district, a state, and the United States. That's my statement there. Never will get over that school doing that. I tell you, I took a lot of begging and pleading to get that benefactor back on board.
Yeah, and that's why fundraising has to be a bigger, at your individual school has to be a part of the bigger plan for your district. And that's why all activities have to be approved. You just can't go out on your own. If you get a benefactor, you know, if you have one on the line, you need to involve your superintendent with those things. That's why there are all these, your district has all these rules on fundraising. You need to make sure you know what they are and you follow those. And your district has all these rules on how you handle the money. And the state has all these rules on how you handle the money. Money is the number one that gets you in trouble the quickest, because it's the easiest to track. So let's look at what are the laws. Now, again, the ones in South Carolina are pretty much the same. What are the laws that principals have to follow from the perspective of the statute? So let's share our screen and go to that document. So here it is, 15C 288, which are the duties and responsibilities of the principal. The first is to grade and classify pupils. And so this will be actually our first case study. And we're going to talk about case studies last this morning. You are the person as the principal who actually classifies kids, pass, fail, and assigns grades into their classes, not the teacher. You have to remember that part. And our first case study is, you know, will cheating strike Bobby out, is about a teacher who has assigned a failing grade for the year on the basis of one out-of-class assignment that should have counted less than 1% of the final grade. She has decided that it will count more than 50% of the yearly grade and has failed a kid for the entire year. And so we're going to work through that one. That's our first case study. But the overarching notion here is teachers don't fail kids, teachers don't grade kids. That would be the duties and responsibilities, the power of the principal. To make accurate reports to the superintendent and local board to improve instruction, that's your job. To conduct fire drills and inspect for fire hazards. On our Blackboard page for today, I have that facilities checklist. And again, if your district doesn't have one to do the fire hazard checks twice a month, you can use mine. Either use yours or mine. That's one of your activities to do from discussion board. That's the one that we forget. That's the one that'll get you the quickest on facilities. The law says you have to have a monthly fire drill, and everybody knows that because we have the fire drill and do that. But what most folks don't know is that twice a month you have to conduct a safety inspection of your facilities twice a month, and you have to have it documented. And if a kid gets hurt, if there's a fire, if anything goes wrong in your building, the first thing that everybody checks on is that safety record. Those safety, twice monthly safety checks. Now, if you get your first AP job, most of the time that's going to be your responsibility to go with the custodian around twice a month and check to make sure everything's like it's supposed to be. Because that's the thing that happens is that there has to be a log. Those documents have to be kept. And again, under today, the link for today on Blackboard, there's a facilities inventory there. So if your school district doesn't have one, where you check your facilities twice a month, you can use mine to do that with. That's a big deal. Trust me, if you have anything if a kid gets hurt, that's the first thing that they ask for is that log to make sure your building is safe. You check the boiler rooms, you make sure the chemicals are stored properly and not on the floor. You know, I had a situation at Garinger High School when I was in central office at CMS. I got a call and said the custodians had put some of those classroom dividers up in the back of the cafeteria and were storing, and the fire marshal found that they were, no, it was the health inspector. When he came and inspected the cafeteria, he found that they had put a divider up at the back of the cafeteria there out on the floor where the kids could get to it to hide it from their sight, and put all the cleaning chemicals in the cafeteria so they wouldn't have to go back to the chemical storage room and get them saved some steps. If you've ever been to Garinger High School, it made National Geographic magazine when it opened in 1959. It's built like a college campus. They have different buildings. It's not like a modern high school that everything's in one big building or attached building. You got to walk all the way across campus to where the chemicals were stored. And so the custodians, just to make it easier to clean up themselves, decided we'll just move all the chemicals over out here in the cafeteria, out here on the floor where kids eat, and we'll just put something in front of it where they can't see it. That did not go well for us with the health inspector. That's the kind of things that we're talking about. You're supposed to catch that kind of stuff on your monthly, twice monthly inspection, where stuff like that doesn't happen. And it says you have to file a written report twice a month. It tells you have to do those things. To discipline students and assign duties to teachers with regard to discipline. People say, you know, can the principal assign me to bus duty? Absolutely, because right there it says discipline students and assign duties to teachers with regard to discipline. That means supervision. That's where the supervision schedule and duty roster, that's the legal basis for that. Protect school property, report acts to law enforcement. Again, we'll go over that. We'll have a whole section on that. The 16 acts of crime and violence have to be reported, not only to the superintendent, but to the state as well, to law enforcement. To make available copies of the school budget and school improvement plans. I told you that. Those are public documents. To evaluate certified employees and develop action plans. That's why you saw my MTSS for teachers this morning. That is a legal requirement. That would be the document that I would file that shows that I have a plan on how I'm going to do that. I have to turn that in to transfer student records, to do driver's ed, to establish school improvement teams. That's the legal piece on that. And then there's been a new one added about McKinney-Vento and military kids. And so those are the legal requirements that you have. And so here's my kind of close on this piece. What we encourage at Gardner-Webb University as a Christian university who believes in servant leadership, integrity, and the foundation of faith, we believe that you must be an ethical leader as well as a legal leader. And so that's why when we have you do your case studies, we ask you to speak to the ethics, the 4 paradigms of ethics: care, justice, critique, and profession. We believe that's just as important as following the law. We're a nation of laws, but we want you to be an administrator not only of laws, but also of ethical behavior, ethical concern. And so there are those 4 paradigms of ethics that you would use when you're doing your case studies. You know, is this legal, illegal, right thing to do, the wrong thing to do? That's got to factor in there as well. Again, we go back to legally, it was okay to throw away the low kids and the upper kids, but it wasn't an ethical thing to do. And the backlash has been homeschooling, private schools, and charters because we didn't do the right thing. Our ethic of profession was not there. We didn't care. Our ethic of justice wasn't there. Our ethic of care wasn't there. Yeah, we were doing the legal thing. We just weren't doing the right thing. And so that's why we have to add our paradigm of ethical behavior for school executives as well. And so that's the legal basis of what you do every day. And so now I want to talk about discussion boards. Close that out and go to discussion boards. And so here are your activities for this semester.
Dale, let me interrupt. Jennifer asked a question on independent nonprofits, and are the parameters the same? As the principal going to be held to task on that? And it is a little bit different if it's a 501c3 entity. For instance, Jennifer, you can relate to this being in Gaston County. There is an Ashbrook Foundation that raises. Ashbrook is one of the high schools in Gaston County, and they solicit from any graduate from Ashbrook High School who wants to give, and then make a donation to the school. So it is a separate entity. Some school districts handle booster clubs, PTOs, a little bit differently than others. In Wilkes County, we required every fundraising arm at a school to be a 501c3. And so many chose not to do it, but it does alleviate a little bit the pressure of the principal being responsible for everything, and puts more pressure on the president of the booster organization to be responsible. They kind of, their name is on it, so they become more liable for any mistake that's made. All that being said, where Dale is really hammering this is, if the Ashbrook Foundation, which is former students from Ashbrook High School in Gastonia, North Carolina, if there's an embezzlement to the foundation, they run it through Gaston Community Foundation, so it's going to be really hard to do. In fact, probably impossible. But if something would go wrong, the principal at Ashbrook's still going to be the face of the school. And what the community is going to see is Ashbrook. They're not going to see that it was a foundation. So any way you want to slice it, even if you have all protocols to prove that you had nothing to do with it, if you're the principal of the school, people are going to think you had something to do with it because the school's named on it. And so, but I think the way that, in all honesty, and I'm an alumnus of Ashbrook, and so I'm kind of referring to you, Jennifer. The rest of you don't know much about, or most of you don't know much about Gaston County, but I think they've handled that as well as it can be handled. They have the foundation all, when someone wants to give, and I did as an alumnus, I mean, not a lot, but I gave, and you write the check to Gaston Community Foundation, and then in the memo say Ashbrook, and it goes that way. And the Gaston Community Foundation then handles all the money and writes the check for whatever the cause is. So I think if you can get, if you can keep the money from coming in to the school in that way, so that it alleviates the pressure of the bookkeeper at the school and the principal at the school having anything to do with it. And the foundation decides then, maybe in conjunction with the school leadership, how to spend it, but that's the ticket to do. And so for all of you, and that would go for elementary, middle, high, and I know, because you talked yesterday about what the band boosters are doing at North Gaston. I don't know if you're a 501c3 or not, or if it'll funnel through, but you probably are. And
we actually changed ours over when we first came to North Gaston, and let them so that way it wouldn't be an issue. They filed for their nonprofit status. They take care of all the taxes. They have their own accounts, all of it, and it's a totally separate organization in itself. But we thought it was easier that way, so that then they can literally just donate to the program if there's things that we need or something like that, or if money needs to be put into the account, then Tim writes a receipt for, you know, of that money to the school, and then it goes into the school account. Because that way, legally, if there was anything to happen, it wouldn't be on the school. So that's why I was wanting to make sure, because we had our chorus teacher had asked about fundraising things, and I knew fundraising was that sticky area, and I said, yeah, I think you need to have a set of booster parents or leadership that you can talk about filing for a whole nonprofit organization in its own self, so that you don't get into any situations. So I hope that was right advice.
You did, excellent advice. And last thing on this, and then you get to see your discussion boards. And I know you are all excited about that. Remember too, Dale's comment that when you have athletic boosters and band boosters, and if they decide they're going to purchase something for the athletic team or the band program or the choral program or whatever, once you purchase it for the school, then it becomes the school's. And the booster organizations really struggle with that. And I understand that, but it's, you know, I've told the stories and I'm not going to repeat them, but I may not have told y'all, or I may have told y'all, but it is, you know, if band boosters buy something for the band to use, but you park it on the school campus, it is the school's property. And I mean, that's the way it's going to be treated. So it's one of those challenging things. It's typically not an issue. I mean, most organizations want to help each other. You know, it's my Sunday school lesson today was about the diversity of churches, the diversity of anything, but the interdependence of all these entities working together in unity for a common cause. That's how we've got to treat schools. And so I think that's where it comes in. Certain priority ought to be given to the entity who raised the money for and is using it for that. But hopefully there'll be a unity of focus too. All right, let's talk about discussion boards.
All right, let me end up. I probably wasn't very clear when I talked about the Ellenborough Fair. That was a 5-0. That was a 501c3. The two problems again with those are they wanted to spend the money on the fair. The whole purpose of this was to raise money for the school, but they didn't want to give teachers money or the school money. They wanted to buy more stuff for the fair. So that's the first problem when you have these 501c3s is they use the money to perpetuate themselves, not understanding that we can't give you labor. Number one, you got to get you're supposed to get community volunteers. Well, we were having to supplement that with teachers. That was the first problem during the day. Second problem is when we raised this money, they wanted to spend it how they wanted to spend it. Well, wait a minute, we need a partnership. Some of that money's got to come to us. Oh no, we want to spend it all on the fair, make the fair bigger and better. So the 501c3 is not the magic bullet either, was my point in that. That's another whole set of problems on its own. Fundraising is the bane of your existence. I don't care how you do it. You know, it's, you know, it may not be the hemorrhoid, but it's the wart on the hemorrhoid if you go to the 501c3.
Y'all really don't need a picture of that.
You probably didn't need a picture of that.
No, you don't need
but that's how bad it is. I'll just tell you right now, as if the hemorrhoid wasn't enough. Now you got a wart. So let's go to discussion boards. All right. So here are your activities. It's a lot of coming and going, to and froing. Emergency plans, I've got one of those. If you don't know what they look like in the crisis box, that's under today's link over here on the side. Find your budget. How long, does it have all the funds listed, federal, state, and local? Anything missing? How long did it take for your administrator to find your crisis plan? Those things are, unfortunately, we just like Steve was talking about, this past Wednesday when we had our faculty meeting, we had our head of campus police come in and do active shooter. That it's real, what your plan is. And then what your administrator talked to them, what they think is the most 5 important steps in budgeting, do a facilities walkthrough. If you don't have a checklist, I've got one under today's link again in Blackboard. So that's your first. You should read the Principal's Guide to School Law, chapter 1 and 2 for context. And then your second activity that we're coming up on down the road is human resources. How do you go about getting openings in your district? How do you advertise? What's the process? Who interviews? Who checks references? Who does background? All those things. Also, employee assistance. Who does that in your district? What have you got? What do you offer? Those kinds of things. Again, your references are chapters 3 and 4. Your intervention. Everybody's supposed to have MTSS now. Where are you? COVID stopped the implementation. It was supposed to be in by last July, but where are you in that? Also, IAP meetings, who's in charge? Chapters 7, 8, and 11. Cyberbullying, unfortunately, because of social media, that's our biggest disciplinary problem in schools now is social media related things. Read chapters 13, 14, and 15. Examine your policy on cyberbullying for your district. Also, how would you respond to claim of sexual harassment? Again, cyberbullying and sexual harassment are the biggest things, sexual misbehavior. Discipline, what's your system of discipline? Do you use PBIS, assertive discipline? What are you using in your district, in your school? Your code of conduct, observe a due process when somebody's being, one of your administrators is processing discipline. How long does it take? You need to learn the difference between substantive and procedural due process. Substance is what the policy in your district says. The procedural is how it actually gets carried out. Read the 2, 5, 6, 9, and 10, and then field trip. What do you do on that one? That brings us to liability. It's bigger than field trip. It brings us into negligence and liability and some of those things. So read chapters 1 and 5. So those are your activities. And then the last thing for today is to look at case studies. We have 4 case studies this semester. And here are your materials over here in this link. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Got a couple things for you. You can look at case 1 is about grading. Case 2 is Leandro 3. I've got some materials for you here. Here's your case study groups. You'll just do 2 groups. You'll present at our next one. And so for the case study itself, you click on case study 1 directions, and there it is. And so when you present, and you will at our next meeting, which will be on October 19th, as you can see, you present your case study. That's pretty much all we'll do that night is your case study. We'll do some other things, but this for that night, make sure that we get ourselves squared away on case studies. You'll present your case study. You will work in your group again. The groups are defined for you under case study materials. You have 2 groups. So there's group 1 and group 2. You will work together to collaboratively come up with a PowerPoint presentation that answers the questions that for case study 1 that are right here. There they are, case study 1 directions. And I've got a link back to that lesson plan, role of the principal, so you'll know what the laws are and what the ethical concern is. We already looked at that document this morning. I've got a link back to it there for you. And you will present that night, just like you presented your laws yesterday. You will present a case study collaboratively as a group. This is what we think, or we didn't all think the same thing. but you will have the floor when we meet again on that Tuesday week. You will have the floor to present your case study 1. Now, after you present case study 1, you will write me a half-page reflection of the process. Doesn't have to be a whole half page. My team worked together. My team was dysfunctional. How did your team work? You know, collaborating virtually to produce a product is a whole nother level of just getting together and talking. How did it go? Did everybody do their part? Here's what I learned. Here was my takeaway from the actual case. We learned this, but I don't agree with that. I want your reflection on the process and the product, what you learned. Half-page reflection. I've got a here where it says case study drop boxes. You put your PowerPoint and your reflection. Again, everybody puts the group PowerPoint in, but to them one time won't get everybody a grade. But you write your own reflection. You tell me what you took away from being involved with these other 4 people that you were involved in this process. The process itself, how it worked, did it work well? We used a common Word document, or we used Google Docs, or we used a common PowerPoint. You know, how it worked. Did everybody do their part? Did everybody agree? Did we have lively discussion, or did, you know, what went on during the process of developing our answer, our response to this? And then this is what I took away. This is what I learned from this. And that's what you will do in terms of your case studies. And so you can see our meeting times for the remainder. Some nights we'll have some content to go along with our presentations. The first night, the presentations tend to take a very long time. That's why I don't have anything other than when we meet again on Tuesday the 19th. That's the only thing that we're going to do that night is just the case study. Now, after that, when we do some of our other case studies, I'll have some content that go with them, like this one on facilities. We'll review most of the things that we covered today. It won't take us long. We've already covered these things, but I'll review those that night. Shouldn't take us very long. When we get to case study 3, now we're going to, again, this is an LGBTQ one, and then case study 4, we'll do that night. We'll do some different things as well. But you can check and see. So on the 26th, we'll do that. On this November the 2nd, after we do that one, we're going to do bullying and discipline, and that one that goes along with We Are Normal Too. And then that will lead us into our last one, which is on exceptional children. And we'll do a little content that goes along with it. And that'll take us to our November 20th. When we get together, we'll be talking about human resources. That day, that's a big part of principle in terms of not just hiring them, but evaluating them. And we're going to spend all day that day on human resources. And then that final Sunday, we will do TD checks, and that will conclude us. Now, I don't know what to tell you about whether we'll get to meet in Charlotte then or not. Steve, when are we going to make a decision on that?
I'm really hopeful we can get together one time. And so I think we would probably hope to have a decision by November 1st. And that would, I think we are beginning to see some, I won't call it positive news, but some lessening negative news maybe. But we certainly do not want to impose on anybody, but I think we would benefit from one time together if we can do it. So, but you need time to plan. So I think, I don't have my calendar. Here's my calendar. Yeah, November 1st is a Monday, right? So we'll try to have it to you by Monday, November 1st.
All right, Lee, what's your question? I don't know that I understand it.
I could probably find it in the course. I haven't looked at it specifically yet, but each group is doing one case study
You're doing the same case study every week, and then we'll declare a winner, which group won. So the first week, both groups will do case study 1, and then we
perfect.
The second. Yeah, and now I'll hurt your feelings. You've already figured that out. You know, I'll use one group to beat the other one up. If one of you does really good, and the other one doesn't, I'll let you know.
It is a fun exercise.
Yeah,
he's got the case that you're going to do. When you click it, you'll see the case. Yeah. It's in this book. If you got the book, but he's
I've got the cases for you right there.
Yeah, it's right there. So it's case study 1 is not the first case that's in this book.
No,
probably strikes out. I think it's number 15. But you have access to it in Blackboard.
Yeah. So will cheating strike Bobby out? It's right there. So just click on the case again. Let me go back here. So we've got case study materials, things that'll help you with them, and then you just click on case study 1, and there it is. There's the direction, and there's the case. Same thing for case study 2. Now I've got some materials that'll help you with them here. Principal's guide, do those. Case study 1, the Duke Law, the ruling on Leandro. I've got some things here that'll help. Here's a wonderful PowerPoint on case study on Leandro. When we get to that one, it is absolutely great. So here are some materials that'll help you. And here are your case studies, and here are your drop boxes. Now these are a little more planned and prepared than what you've done. They're a little more in depth. The topics, there are right answers on these. That if you don't get them right, you could go to jail or lose your house. So we're playing for keeps on these. The stakes are much higher on these. And so we've got one on finance, and we got one on grading, the very hardest school of grading. We've got one on finance. We've got one on LGBTQ, which is students' rights and how we treat and discrimination and discipline and all those things. And then we got one on exceptional children, EC intervention, those things, which is killer federal stuff. Those are our 4 big areas. Those are the 4 that will cause you the most grief as a principal: discipline, behavior, grading, exceptional children, and this issue, just like that Phyllis has with the kid that wants to be identified as a male. These are real life deals, but there's right and wrong in these, and you got to make sure you get it right. I see our time is up for the day. Can't believe it. I've had a wonderful time. I've had the time of my life.
Let them out early.
I've had the time of my life. I've never felt this way before. I swear it's the truth.
I know. They'd like to stay on for 30 more minutes, Dale.
I'm not in Lake Lure today, but that's some dirty dancing, isn't it? Lake Lure. I'm in Lake Norman today, but we've had a great time. We've had a good weekend. I know it's a grind, it's a slog. We hope to get to see you in person in November, but absent that, we will see you again on Tuesday, the 19th. In 9-10 days, we will see y'all again. I'm glad you all survived the weekend. You get to watch the ball games this afternoon and have lunch, and without having to come back to class in the afternoon. So it's a pretty good day for y'all. So we appreciate y'all being with us. Thank you for choosing us, Gardner Webb, and we will see you Tuesday week.